Take that filthy apron off. You are embarrassing my guests. Ethan Caldwell's voice cracked across the ballroom like a whip, silencing every conversation beneath the crystal chandeliers. The string quartet faltered for half a heartbeat before forcing the music back to life. Maya Brooks froze beside the champagne tower, her fingers tightening around a silver serving tray as dozens of wealthy eyes drifted toward her. Heat from the towering fireplace brushed one side of her face while the polished marble floor reflected every glittering light above her. She swallowed quietly. "I am sorry, sir." Ethan stepped closer, his custom tuxedo flawless beneath the warm golden glow. "Sorry does not clean up mistakes." He lifted a linen napkin from the table and dropped it at Maya's feet. "Pick it up. Slowly. Maybe everyone here will remember what happens when staff forget their place." A ripple of uneasy laughter rolled through the room. Some guests looked away. Others smiled behind crystal wine glasses. Maya bent down without arguing, the edge of her worn black uniform brushing against the cold marble. She could feel hundreds of eyes pressing into her back. Her heartbeat echoed louder than the orchestra. Somewhere near the entrance, cameras flashed as reporters photographed another billionaire arriving, completely unaware of the humiliation unfolding only a few yards away. Maya reached for the napkin. Before her fingers touched it, Ethan lightly nudged it farther away with the polished tip of his expensive shoe. "Not finished yet." More laughter. Softer this time. Crueler. Maya lifted her eyes for only a second. His face showed no anger. Only amusement. That somehow hurt more. Across the ballroom, the scent of roasted filet mignon and fresh flowers drifted through the air while servers continued moving as though nothing unusual was happening. Nobody interrupted. Nobody defended her. They all knew who owned Caldwell Technologies. They all knew who signed million-dollar contracts with a single handshake. Maya quietly picked up the napkin and placed it back onto the table. "Thank you for correcting me, sir," she said, her voice calm enough to confuse even herself. Ethan smirked. "See? That was not difficult." He turned toward his investors, already dismissing her existence. Maya remained perfectly still, lowering her gaze again, but inside her chest something heavier than shame settled into silence. She resumed serving glasses of sparkling water as though the last minute had never happened. Every movement stayed careful. Every breath measured. Then a sharp crash shattered the music. A crystal glass exploded against the floor near the grand staircase. Heads snapped toward the sound. A small boy stood there, no older than 8, one trembling hand clutching his throat, while the other reached desperately toward his father. His face had already begun losing color. Guests screamed. Chairs scraped violently across marble. Someone shouted for security. Another yelled for a doctor. Ethan's confident smile disappeared instantly. "Liam!" he shouted, sprinting across the ballroom. Maya's eyes locked onto the boy for less than 1 second, and something buried deep inside her memory came rushing back with terrifying clarity. She had seen those exact eyes before. That same desperate struggle. That same terrifying silence before everything changed. Without thinking, she set the silver tray down and stepped forward. Ethan looked up just as she reached the first stair. "Do not touch my son!" he roared. The ballroom fell completely silent as Maya looked directly into his terrified eyes and whispered 6 words that made every heartbeat in the room seem to stop. "You have less than 1 minute left. I said, do not touch him." Ethan's voice echoed through the ballroom, raw with fear instead of authority, but Maya did not even look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on the boy's face. Liam's lips had begun turning pale. His tiny fingers clawed helplessly at his collar, while every breath became shorter than the last. Around them, expensive shoes scraped frantically across polished marble. Someone dropped a champagne flute. Another guest shouted that an ambulance was already on the way. It sounded impossibly far away. Maya slowly raised both empty hands where everyone could see them. "I am not here to hurt him," she said quietly. "Please watch his breathing." Ethan stepped between her and his son, his jaw tight enough to tremble. "You are a maid. Stay in your place." The words landed harder than before because this time they were wrapped in panic. Maya did not answer. She noticed something no one else seemed to see. The half-eaten dessert plate beside Liam. Crushed pistachios scattered across the white porcelain. The faint smell of roasted nuts still lingered in the warm air beneath the perfume and candlelight. Her pulse jumped. A memory flashed through her mind. Hospital lights. A beeping monitor. Her younger brother gasping exactly the same way before doctors finally discovered his severe tree nut allergy. She took one careful step forward. Has Liam ever been tested for food allergies? Ethan stared at her, as though she had spoken another language. What? Answer me. Her voice stayed calm. Has he? Ethan hesitated for the first time all evening. No. The room grew strangely quiet. One of the private chefs looked toward the dessert table, his face suddenly draining of color. Sir, he whispered. Tonight's chocolate mousse was prepared with pistachio cream. Ethan slowly turned toward the chef. What did you say? Before the chef could answer, Liam stumbled again, his knees buckling against the staircase. A terrified gasp swept through the guests. Maya moved instinctively, catching the boy before he struck the marble floor. Ethan reached out to pull her away, then froze. Liam, who had been pushing everyone else aside in panic, clung desperately to Maya's sleeve instead. His frightened eyes searched only for hers. The ballroom fell into stunned silence. Maya supported his shoulders gently without forcing him flat. Her breathing stayed slow, steady, almost contagious. Stay with me, sweetheart, she whispered. Just keep looking at me. Liam blinked weakly. His breathing remained shallow, but the panic in his eyes eased just enough for everyone to notice. Ethan stood motionless only a few feet away, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. He had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without breaking a sweat, yet he could not help his own son. Maya looked directly at him. Does he carry an emergency injector? Ethan frowned, confused. Then something flickered across his face. His wife. She had insisted months ago that one stay inside Liam's backpack after a doctor mentioned unexplained skin reactions. Ethan had laughed, saying they were being overly cautious. He never remembered where she kept it. His eyes widened. Rebecca, he whispered to himself. She packed one. Every heartbeat in the ballroom seemed louder than the orchestra had ever been. Ethan spun toward his head of security. Find Liam's backpack. Now! Security officers sprinted in opposite directions. The guests parted silently. Maya kept one hand gently behind Liam's back while watching every breath he struggled to take. Then the family butler suddenly stopped near the entrance, reached into a navy blue backpack hanging beside the coat rack, and slowly pulled out a small yellow medical case. He stared at it in disbelief before lifting his eyes toward Maya. The yellow medical case caught the chandelier light like a lifeline, and every conversation in the ballroom died at once. The butler's hand trembled. I found it. Ethan lunged toward him, but Maya's calm voice stopped him cold. Do not panic. Panic will scare him. Ethan stared at her, furious that a woman he had humiliated only minutes earlier was giving him orders inside his own home. You do not tell me what to do. Maya never looked away from Liam. Tiny beads of sweat glistened across the boy's forehead. His breathing came in thin, uneven pulls that seemed to steal the air from everyone else in the room. The orchestra had gone silent. The only sounds left were expensive shoes shifting against marble, distant sirens somewhere beyond the estate gates, and dozens of phones quietly recording every second. Maya reached toward the yellow case. Ethan caught her wrist before her fingers could touch it. You are not touching that injector. His grip was firm, but uncertain. Deep inside, fear had already replaced pride. Maya met his eyes without flinching. Then open it yourself. Ethan hesitated. The simple latch suddenly looked impossibly complicated. His hands, steady enough to sign billion-dollar contracts, shook just enough for everyone to notice. He snapped the case open. Inside rested the injector beside a folded white card. Maya saw the card first. Read it. Ethan unfolded it with trembling fingers. His wife's handwriting covered the page. If Liam ever has trouble breathing after eating nuts, use the injector immediately and call emergency services. Do not wait. Ethan stopped reading. His face lost all color. Around him, the guests exchanged stunned looks. Nobody had expected the answer to be sitting inside the very case he had ignored for months. The family physician finally rushed through the ballroom doors, still carrying his black medical bag. Relief swept across the crowd. Doctor, thank God! Ethan stepped back instinctively, convinced everything would finally be under control. The physician knelt beside Liam, glanced at the injector, then at Maya. Who identified the reaction? Nobody answered for a moment. Every eye slowly turned toward the maid kneeling beside the boy. The doctor's expression changed. She is correct, he said quietly. Every second matters. Ethan swallowed hard. The physician held up the injector, then unexpectedly placed it into Maya's hand. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Ethan looked stunned. Doctor, what are you doing? The physician never took his eyes off Maya. Someone here recognized the symptoms before anyone else. Right now, I trust the calmest person in this room. Ethan's pride cracked beneath the weight of those words. Cameras rose higher. Guests whispered behind trembling hands. Maya carefully examined the injector, but instead of moving immediately, she looked directly at the physician. What is Liam's current weight? The physician answered without hesitation. Maya slowly lowered the injector. A flicker of concern crossed her face for the first time. Something is wrong. The ballroom seemed to shrink around those 3 words. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. What do you mean? Maya turned the injector over, studying the printed label reflecting beneath the ballroom lights. Her heartbeat quickened. This injector was prescribed for a child almost half his size. Silence crashed over the room. Even the physician leaned closer, reading the label again. His confident expression disappeared. He looked at Maya, then back at Ethan. She is right. Ethan felt the marble floor might as well have vanished beneath him. The one emergency device he had trusted to save his son suddenly became another terrifying question. Then the physician slowly lifted his eyes toward Ethan and spoke the sentence nobody in the ballroom was prepared to hear. If we use the wrong dose now, we could create an entirely different emergency. The physician's words hung in the air like ice. Nobody moved. The tiny injector rested in Maya's open palm, its yellow plastic catching the cold reflection of the ballroom lights. Ethan's breathing grew uneven. There has to be another one, he said, his voice cracking for the first time that night. Find it. Security scattered through the mansion, polished shoes pounding across marble hallways while radios hissed with frantic voices. Guests instinctively stepped back, whispering behind raised phones as dozens of tiny camera lenses focused on the billionaire whose perfect charity gala was unraveling in real time. Liam's breathing became softer. Too soft. Maya gently placed 2 fingers against the boy's wrist. She closed her eyes for only a heartbeat. His pulse is fading. The physician immediately knelt beside her, watching her expression instead of the crowd. What do you see? Maya looked toward the dessert table again. Every plate had been cleared except one. A tiny silver fork rested beside a half-finished chocolate mousse topped with crushed green pistachios and a thin drizzle of caramel. Something felt wrong. She stood slowly, every eye following her. Ethan stepped into her path. Where are you going? To find out why only Liam is reacting. His jaw tightened. My son is dying and you are looking at dessert? Maya met his stare without raising her voice. That is exactly why. The physician watched silently before nodding once. Let her. Ethan's face hardened. Another stranger trusting the maid over him chipped away at the authority he had built for decades. Maya crossed the ballroom while whispers spread behind her like wine through dry leaves. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above. A refrigeration unit beneath the catering station hummed steadily. Steam drifted from untouched serving trays. She stopped beside the pastry display and picked up the silver ingredient card. Her eyes narrowed. This says almond flour? She looked at the chef. Who changed the recipe? The executive chef swallowed hard. Sweat glistened along his temples beneath the kitchen lights. Nobody. Maya lifted a tiny green crumb from the edge of the plate and rubbed it between her fingertips. This is not almond. Silence. She turned toward the pastry station. Stainless steel mixing bowls reflected the ballroom lights like mirrors. One industrial mixer still vibrated faintly, its motor clicking as it cooled. Maya leaned closer. The scent hit her instantly. Fresh pistachio paste. Much stronger than before. Doctor. She held up the green residue. This was not cross-contamination. The physician's eyes widened. You think the entire batch was made with pistachios? Maya nodded slowly. But every allergy label says almond. Ethan stared between them, confused. What difference does that make? Before anyone answered, the banquet manager hurried into the ballroom carrying a clipboard, his face strained of color. Sir? He could barely breathe. We served that dessert to more than 200 guests tonight. A wave of panic rolled through the ballroom. Conversations exploded all at once. Parents rushed toward children. Glasses clinked against tables. Several guests immediately pushed away untouched dessert plates while others stared at them in horror. Camera flashes lit the room like lightning. Ethan felt the walls closing around him. His charity gala had become something far worse. His company's logo stood 30 feet high behind the stage, now framed by fear instead of celebration. Maya looked at the physician again. Call every table. Ask if anyone has a tree nut allergy. The physician immediately reached for his phone. Ethan stood frozen, watching complete strangers follow Maya's instructions before his own. Then a terrified waitress came running from the west hallway, tears streaming down her face. She stopped in front of Maya, unable to catch her breath. There is another child. The entire ballroom went silent again. And she just collapsed too. Another child? Ethan's voice broke as every head in the ballroom snapped toward the trembling waitress. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. She is in the east dining room. She cannot catch her breath. Panic exploded. Investors abandoned polished cocktail tables. Parents rushed through the marble corridor, their footsteps echoing beneath the vaulted ceiling. Phone cameras kept recording. Nobody wanted to stop filming history as it unfolded. The physician looked at Maya. She was already moving. Ethan caught her arm again. You are not running this house. Maya pulled free, her eyes fixed on the terrified waitress. No. I am trying to save the people inside it. Those words landed harder than any accusation. Ethan hesitated just long enough for Maya to disappear into the east wing with the physician close behind. The dining room was chaos. Crystal glasses rattled across white linen as guests crowded around a little girl sitting on the floor beside her mother. Tears streamed down the woman's face. Please help her. Maya knelt immediately. The child was frightened, breathing fast, but something felt different. Too different. Maya glanced at the dessert plate beside her. Untouched. She frowned. She never ate the mousse? The mother shook her head violently. She is allergic to peanuts. I would never let her. Maya slowly scanned the table. Silverware. Bread basket. Butter dish. Water pitcher. Then she noticed a tiny green garnish resting on the girl's dinner roll. Her fingers froze above it. Chef. The executive chef hurried over, his white jacket stained with sweat. What is this garnish? Pistachio dust. He answered automatically before realizing what he had just admitted. The room fell silent. Maya closed her eyes for a brief second. You changed more than the dessert. Even the physician stopped writing his notes. Every bread basket on every table carried the same green powder. A waiter whispered, We served fresh rolls to every guest. The realization spread across the room like a cold wave. This was never one contaminated dessert. It was the entire menu. Ethan stumbled against a chair, his expensive shoes scraping loudly across the marble. His charity gala had just become a catastrophe capable of destroying not only his reputation but every partnership he had spent 30 years building. Around him, investors exchanged alarmed glances. Several quietly stepped away from him as though failure itself might be contagious. Then one sharp voice cut through the room. "This is her fault." Everyone turned. The executive chef pointed directly at Maya. "She was in the kitchen earlier tonight." Murmurs instantly filled the dining room. More phones lifted into the air. Ethan looked at Maya with confusion and anger colliding inside him. "Were you?" Maya answered without hesitation. "Yes." The whispers grew louder. "I delivered clean serving trays," she continued calmly. "Nothing else." The chef took one aggressive step forward. "Nobody can verify that." Several guests nodded uncertainly. Security officers instinctively moved closer to Maya. She suddenly stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by suspicion. The same people who had begun trusting her only moments earlier now looked at her with doubt. Ethan's breathing became heavier. His voice turned cold again, reaching for control because it was all he had left. "Until we know exactly what happened, nobody leaves this estate." Security locked the main entrance with a heavy metallic click that echoed through the silent mansion. Maya looked slowly around the room. Fear. Cameras. Wealth. Accusation. Then her eyes settled on one detail everyone else had missed. Near the swinging kitchen door, a stainless steel trash bin stood half open. Inside, partially buried beneath empty ingredient bags, lay a torn pistachio label with a bright red sticker across it. Recall notice. Maya's heartbeat stopped for half a second. She whispered almost to herself, "This was never an accident." At that exact moment, the mansion lights flickered once, then every light went completely dark. Darkness swallowed the mansion so completely that the ringing silence felt louder than the panic had. A few emergency lights flickered awake along the marble hallway, bathing the room in a pale blue glow that reflected across silver trays and polished railings. Phone screens became tiny islands of light, illuminating anxious faces and trembling hands. Somewhere deep inside the estate, a backup generator coughed once, then fell silent again. No music. No conversation. Only slow breathing and the distant vibration of unanswered cell phones. Maya did not move. She stood beside the dining table, her eyes fixed on the half-open trash bin as though everything else had disappeared. Around her, security officers hesitated. Minutes earlier they had been ready to escort her away. Now none of them seemed certain what to do. Ethan remained frozen several feet behind her. His tuxedo no longer looked powerful beneath the cold emergency lights. The confidence that had filled every room he entered had quietly drained away, replaced by something unfamiliar. Doubt. He watched Maya instead of giving orders. That realization alone unsettled everyone watching. The physician slowly picked up the torn ingredient label from the trash bin. His flashlight swept across the faded printing. The bright red recall notice reflected sharply against the stainless steel wall. His eyes narrowed. "This product was pulled from distribution 3 days ago." Nobody answered. The executive chef lowered his head. Tiny beads of sweat rolled down his neck despite the cooling air. Maya spoke softly, almost as though she were thinking aloud. "If this shipment was recalled, it should never have entered this kitchen." Her words settled heavily across the room. Investors exchanged uneasy glances. Someone quietly stopped recording. Another slowly lowered their phone altogether. The story no longer felt like public scandal. It felt personal. Ethan looked toward the chef. "Did you order these ingredients?" The chef opened his mouth, then closed it again. I do not know." His answer sounded hollow even to himself. Maya walked toward the preparation station with slow, deliberate steps. Every heel strike echoed through the silent room. She brushed her fingertips across the stainless steel counter. A thin layer of pale green powder clung to the metal beneath the flashlight beam. She lifted her hand. "Nobody cleaned this station after service." The physician looked beside her. Fresh mixing bowls remained exactly where they had been abandoned. Measuring spoons. Empty cartons. A delivery invoice partially tucked beneath a cutting board. Maya carefully pulled it free. Her eyes scanned the page once. Then twice. Her breathing slowed even further. Ethan noticed the change immediately. "What is it?" Maya did not answer. Instead, she turned the invoice toward the physician. His expression shifted the instant he read the supplier's name. "That company shut down 6 months ago," he whispered. Ethan frowned. "That is impossible." "No," the physician replied quietly. "It is documented." The silence that followed felt almost physical. Maya looked around the room. Every face now watched her differently. Not as the maid who had embarrassed herself on the ballroom floor. Not as the woman security had nearly removed. They were waiting for her to notice what they could not. Even Ethan had unconsciously taken one small step closer, as though the safest place in the mansion had somehow become wherever Maya happened to be standing. Her eyes drifted towards a loading entrance beyond the kitchen. The heavy steel door stood slightly open, allowing cool night air to slip inside. Outside, a delivery truck sat alone beneath a security light, its engine already cold. Maya stared at it for several long seconds. "That truck should not still be here," she said. Ethan followed her gaze. "Why?" Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because whoever brought those recalled ingredients never planned to come back for them." At that exact moment, the truck's interior light flickered on by itself, and a shadow slowly moved behind the windshield. "I would not leave that truck alone if I were you," Maya said quietly, her eyes never leaving the faint silhouette behind the windshield. Nobody questioned her this time. The emergency lights cast pale reflections across the polished hood as warm air drifted from the engine compartment, even though the physician had just said it should have been cold. Ethan noticed it too. "The engine," he whispered. "It is still warm." Every head turned toward the loading dock. The silence became unbearable. Then one security officer broke into a run, his polished shoes striking the concrete with sharp echoes that disappeared into the night. 2 more followed. The crowd watched without breathing. Maya remained perfectly still, one hand resting lightly on the stainless steel counter. She was no longer chasing answers. She was waiting for them to catch up. Seconds later, a shout echoed from outside. "The cab is empty!" Confusion swept through the hallway. Ethan hurried toward the dock, investors following only a few steps behind. The delivery truck sat alone beneath the security light, its cargo doors hanging slightly open. Warm air still escaped from the cabin. Someone had been there moments ago. Security searched beneath the trailer, behind stacked pallets, inside nearby hedges. Nothing. It was as though the driver had vanished into the darkness. Maya walked slowly toward the rear of the truck. Her flashlight drifted across the metal floor inside the cargo area. Empty ingredient boxes. Plastic wrapping. Broken seals. Then she crouched beside a crushed cardboard carton. "Doctor!" He stepped beside her. Maya pointed without touching anything. A second red recall notice had been deliberately peeled off another package and stuffed beneath the pallet instead of being discarded. The physician's expression hardened. "Someone hid it." "No," Maya replied softly. "Someone wanted the kitchen to miss it." Ethan felt the words strike harder than any accusation. This was no longer negligence. It was intent. One of the investors looked toward Ethan, his face pale beneath the floodlights. "If this reaches the press before sunrise..." He never finished the sentence. He did not need to. Ethan already knew. His company's reputation, the charity foundation, tomorrow's merger, decades of trust, everything stood on the edge of collapse. He slowly looked back at Maya. Only hours earlier he had forced her to pick a napkin off the floor while strangers laughed. Now every executive in the courtyard waited for the maid to speak before anyone else did. Maya's flashlight paused near the truck's dashboard. A folded delivery manifest rested against the windshield. She reached through the open door and carefully unfolded it. Her eyes narrowed. This signature. Ethan stepped closer. What about it? Maya held the page beneath the emergency light. It does not belong to your executive chef. The chef looked up in confusion. I never signed that. Maya traced the ink with one finger. The handwriting is trying too hard to imitate yours. The physician leaned in. You can tell that? Maya nodded. I worked in hospital admissions before I became a caregiver for my grandmother. We caught forged consent forms by noticing tiny changes like this. A heavy silence settled over everyone. Nobody laughed. Nobody questioned her. Even the security officers looked toward Maya before taking another step. Ethan lowered his head for a brief moment. Shame settled across his face more heavily than fear ever had. He realized the woman he had dismissed as invisible had quietly spent the entire night seeing what wealth, titles, experts, and power had all overlooked. Then a radio on a security officer's shoulder crackled to life. Control to all units, we found surveillance footage from the loading dock. Every heartbeat seemed to stop. The officer looked at the tablet as the video began playing. His eyes widened. Slowly, almost unwillingly, he lifted the screen toward Ethan and whispered, Sir, you need to see who personally approved this delivery. The tablet screen glowed beneath the pale emergency lights, washing every face in a cold blue haze. Nobody spoke. Even the distant hum of the backup generator seemed to fade as the security officer slowly turned the display toward Ethan. Grainy surveillance footage filled the screen. A delivery truck rolled through the service gate exactly 3 hours before the gala. The timestamp matched the invoice in Maya's hand. Then the camera captured a man stepping from the driver's seat. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, but when he approached the loading dock, he lifted his face just long enough for everyone to recognize him. The executive chef staggered backward. That is my assistant, he whispered, almost to himself. He was terminated last month. The physician looked from the screen to Maya. He had access to the kitchen. Maya nodded once. And he knew exactly where the labels would never be checked. The realization spread quietly through the courtyard. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody argued. Investors who had stood behind Ethan only an hour earlier now looked toward Maya instead, waiting for her next observation as though it carried more weight than every executive title surrounding them. Ethan lowered his eyes. The memory of the ballroom returned with brutal clarity. The dropped napkin. The laughter. The apology she never should have needed to give. His chest tightened. He slowly turned toward Maya, but she was not watching him. She was kneeling beside Liam again, gently reassuring the frightened boy while the physician prepared the correct emergency medication brought by paramedics who had just arrived through the front gates. Blue and red emergency lights flashed silently across the mansion walls, reflecting in the polished marble like ripples on dark water. Liam looked up at Maya with tired eyes and reached for her hand without hesitation. She smiled softly. You are doing great, sweetheart. His breathing gradually steadied. The physician exhaled in relief before looking directly at Ethan. If she had not recognized the first warning signs when she did, we would have been telling a very different story tonight. The words settled over the gathering with enormous weight. Several guests slowly lowered their phones, no longer interested in capturing scandal. They were witnessing something else now. Respect. The executive chef walked toward Maya, shoulders bent beneath invisible shame. His voice barely carried across the courtyard. I accused the wrong person. Maya met his eyes with quiet kindness. Tonight was about protecting children, not protecting pride. He lowered his head, unable to answer. Ethan remained motionless for several seconds before taking a hesitant step forward. Every investor watched him. Every employee watched him. The same guests who had laughed earlier now stood in complete silence. Ethan looked at the woman he had treated as invisible and, for the first time in years, found himself searching for words instead of commands. Miss Brooks. His voice faltered. He stopped, swallowing the rest. No apology seemed large enough. Maya simply gave a small nod, as though she understood everything he could not yet say. She did not ask for recognition. She did not remind anyone how she had been humiliated. She quietly helped the paramedics settle Liam onto a stretcher, smoothing the blanket around his shoulders before stepping back into the shadows where she had spent most of the evening. Yet this time, every eye followed her. Not because she demanded attention, but because dignity had become impossible to ignore. Ethan watched her walk toward the mansion entrance beneath the cold emergency lights. He finally understood that the smallest person in the room had carried the greatest strength all along. Then Liam, already inside the ambulance, lifted his weak hand toward the window and whispered one sentence that froze Ethan where he stood. "Dad, do not let her leave." The ambulance doors remained open for one quiet moment as Liam's small hand rested against the window, waiting. No one spoke. The flashing emergency lights slowed into a gentle rhythm, painting soft streaks of blue across the polished stone driveway. The crowd that had once laughed stood completely still, their phones lowered, their faces stripped of certainty. Maya turned back. Her worn black shoes whispered across the marble as she walked toward the ambulance. She smiled gently and squeezed Liam's hand. "You are going to be just fine." The little boy smiled for the first time that night before the doors closed with a quiet click. The siren never screamed. It rolled away into the darkness almost respectfully, leaving only cool night air and a silence that felt heavier than applause. Ethan remained standing alone beneath the grand entrance, staring at the place where Maya had stopped only moments before. His tailored tuxedo suddenly looked too expensive for a man carrying that much regret. He remembered the napkin, the laughter, the command to stay in her place. Every word echoed louder now than it had inside the ballroom. Slowly, he crossed the courtyard. Hundreds of eyes followed him. Investors, employees, reporters, security officers. Nobody interrupted. When he reached Maya, he did something no one present had ever seen him do. He lowered his head. "Miss Brooks." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I judged your uniform before I ever saw your character." The words hung in the cool air. No cameras clicked. No reporters shouted. Even the wind seemed to pause between the columns of the mansion. Maya looked at him quietly. There was no anger in her eyes. No triumph. Only a calm strength that could never be purchased or inherited. Ethan reached into his jacket and removed the gold name badge that identified him as host of the evening. He looked at it for a long second before placing it gently into his pocket. Then he stepped aside. Not because someone told him to, but because respect finally outweighed pride. The path toward the mansion entrance was now completely clear. Every employee standing along the corridor instinctively moved back. Several guests followed without realizing it. A hallway that had always opened first for wealth now opened for dignity. Maya hesitated only briefly before walking forward. Her posture never changed. Her pace never quickened. She passed beneath the crystal chandeliers where she had been humiliated earlier that evening. This time, nobody laughed. One by one, people nodded as she walked past. Some quietly thanked her. Others simply lowered their eyes. Words were no longer enough. The physician caught up beside Ethan and handed him the folded recall notice recovered from the truck. "This belongs in the investigation," he said. Ethan looked at the crumpled paper before slowly shaking his head. "No." He glanced toward Maya's fading silhouette. "Tonight, it belongs to the woman who noticed what all of us missed." The physician smiled faintly and walked away. Dawn slowly crept across the horizon, replacing the cold blue emergency lights with the first pale gold rays of morning. The marble floors reflected a softer light now. The engines had gone silent. The radios had stopped crackling. The mansion finally breathed again. Maya reached the front steps, paused, and looked once toward the sunrise without saying a word. Behind her, Ethan remained standing exactly where she had left him, no longer the center of the room, no longer the strongest voice in the crowd. For the first time in many years, he understood that true greatness was never measured by the people who stepped aside because they feared you. It was measured by the people who chose to trust you after you had every reason to walk away. Maya quietly disappeared into the morning light, still wearing the same simple maid's uniform she had arrived in. Nothing about her clothes had changed. Everything about the way the world looked at her had.